Monster Professor.
Welcome to the Monster Professor, a show in which we discuss and explore monsters in literature, myth, film, games, folklore, theater, culture, and beyond. I'm your host, Josh Woods, author, editor, professor, and monster expert. And it's been a few episodes before I've reminded anyone where you can find out more about me. I'm promoting my guests all the time, and I always forget to self-promote, so I'll do that before I forget. If you want to find out what else I have going on, check periodically my website, joshwoodsauthor.com. You can also find the podcast episodes there. Of course, you can find them on every major platform, so if you're listening to this podcast on one platform, but you're like, man, I wish it were on YouTube, it is. Check me out on YouTube. Or if you're a Spotify person, but you're listening to it on, say, Google Podcasts, go over to Spotify. It's there too. All over the place. You can find all that out on my website as well as events coming up. Crossing fingers that things aren't canceled. Such as a live podcast event at Florida Southwestern State College this Halloween, October 28th. Theater setting open to the public. So check that out, or my books as well, Black Palace, Oh Monstrous World. When it comes to books and publications, though, I don't know if I have nearly as many as my guest for today. Richard Thomas is my guest for today. And man, what a prolific author of some dark, monstrous, scary stuff and some really cool fiction. Links to all of his websites, places where you can find his book. You can find all of that in the description, but we're also going to share that with you auditorily in the podcast. Richard Thomas is an award-winning author of 7 books, and that includes 3 novels, Disintegration, Breaker, and Transubstantiate, 3 short story collections, Staring into the Abyss, Herniated Roots, and Tribulations, one novella, The Soul Standard, and as far as the stories published, 140 stories all over the place, and he's edited 4 anthologies, among many other projects and publications he's working with. He's been in the Best Horror of the Year anthology. He's been in the running for all the coolest dark awards, the Bram Stoker Award, the Shirley Jackson Award, the Thriller Awards, the Pushcart Prize Awards. He's taught in Transylvania, horror stories and horror writing in Transylvania. I mean, he's been all over the place doing a lot of cool work. And in this conversation today, we get into how to create monsters on the page, how to create those dark and scary and disturbing and uncanny moments. We talk about what's going on with this kind of like a golden era of dark contemporary works, both on the page and on the screen, the new weird as a type of genre. He also shares with us some real life ghost stories, some actual encounters with the supernatural that he has had. And I'll be honest with you, I got the chills listening to it when I was talking with him. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you do too. Let's go. So, Richard Thomas, thank you so much for joining me here on the Monster Professor, man.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about monsters and talk about, teaching and writing and everything in between. Great books, great stories, great movies. There's so much great work going on right now. I feel like we're in kind of a, I don't know if I should say golden age, but I feel like we're in a kind of a boom with horror and contemporary dark, stories and novels and films, everything that A24 is doing, and great stuff on cable and TV and whatnot. So I feel like it's a good time to, talk about monsters and whatnot.
Yeah, you're right about that. I mean, I think maybe a part of it is how many of the gatekeepers are no longer in control of what happens, or maybe that's the wrong way to say it. I'm saying it backwards. All sorts of technology has opened up different
Right.
avenues, not only for highly professional, independent filmmakers
Yes.
and television creators out there who otherwise, 10, 20 years ago wouldn't have been able to get their project off the ground had they gone through traditional gatekeepers. But I mean, even
Yeah.
things like this podcast, I didn't have to go through anybody to get going. I just posted it.
Right.
And so between Netflix and Amazon and YouTube and you name it, there's so many cool projects that are seeing the light of day or the dark of night that
Right.
otherwise never would have got out there. So you're right about
Yeah.
that.
So true. Yeah.
And you are one of these active creators and the contemporary dark and the new weird and the horrifying. You've got tons of books and even more publications. And going through your list of stuff, I feel extremely lazy, but maybe instead I should be just an admiration. And on top of all this, you also work this into your teaching as
Yeah.
well. And so maybe we could just get started with a little bit of background of
Sure.
what got you into the dark side of things and creating more on the darker side rather than purely realistic and say maybe lighter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, great question. I mean, I've always been a big reader and I've always been a big writer. I think going back to grade school, going back to reading, winning a spelling bee in 5th grade, getting the title of most books read, 6th grade. Uh, so I mean, I've always been fascinated by storytelling and stories and visuals and fairy tales and mythology. I remember I took an actual mythology class in high school as an elective, which I just loved. I think probably started, with reading Stephen King in high school. Was kind of, one of the authors, one of the voices that kind of opened my mind to the possibilities of what was out there. I mean, I was thinking the other day about Watership Down and what a messed up movie that is. That's definitely more gritty realism, but um, so I think Stephen King is one of those gatekeepers that kind of, a portal to more supernatural and speculative storytelling. I mean, what I've been writing now for 12 years, writing, editing, teaching, publishing, and I kind of came up writing more neo noir. Uh, I kind of my whole story really kind of stems. I was in advertising for 25 years. I kind of woke up one day at the age of 40. I'm 52 now, and basically realized I was not happy with my advertising career, and I missed writing. And I all that kind of came out of going to think seeing Chuck Palahniuk's movie Fight Club. I saw Fight Club, realized it was based on a book, and then went to his website called The Cult and read everything he had out at the time. And that really kind of just got me excited to read again, that I hadn't been reading in a long time. Chuck's a weird voice. He's grounded in realism, but he's transgressive. But he got me to authors like Will Christopher Bear and Craig Clevenger and Stephen Graham Jones and Dennis Lehane and these other people. And that just got me excited to read again. Somewhere along the way, I ended up taking some classes with some authors. One of them being Jack Ketchum, who's pretty big in the horror community. Rest in peace, Dallas. He passed a couple years ago. But like Craig Clevenger encouraged me to send my work out, and my first pro sale was a short story called Stillness, which I ended up getting in an anthology, Shivers 6, from Cemetery Dance, alongside Stephen King and Peter Straub and a bunch of other authors. Just kind of a breakout moment for me, really exciting. I felt like, well, maybe I don't totally suck. Maybe I could tell a story, and that just kind of got me excited to write again. That story was kind of a slippery realism story. And so I think that just kind of got me excited to write. When I look at like something like neo noir and the new weird, like they're really very close to each other. Surrealism, transgressive fiction, they're all really kind of in the ballpark. The main difference I see between like neo noir and the new weird, which kind of comes out of the old weird, according to Jeff Vandermeer, Lovecraft and like the visceral body horror of Clive Barker get you the new weird. That in neo noir tends to be realism, whereas the new weird tends to slide into the supernatural. One of the few exceptions I could think of that was a movie called Angel Heart, which kind of does both, depending on how you look at it. But I think that's what got me started, and basically decided to get my MFA at some point after taking a number of classes. And so getting my MFA back in 2012, like, helped me to weave in a bunch of literary fiction into my work, which is mostly grounded in realism, although there was some magical realism in there too. So kind of coming out of that, I basically was starting to write more contemporary dark weird stuff. I've always enjoyed horror. I've always enjoyed writing horror, and fantasy and science fiction. But I think kind of being able to see what's out there, all the hybrid work, all the crossover genre work, and subgenre, got me excited, because while I really loved writing neo-noir, I also liked what the supernatural opened up to me and how I could do both. In fact, I've had a couple stories published with Cemetery Dance, the magazine, and both of the stories in the magazine, the last one I had, Chasing Ghosts, and the one coming out this summer, Battle Not with Monsters, are both grounded in reality, and then they slide into this kind of paranoid thriller surrealism. So there's this, if you look at the cover of Cemetery Dance, it says a magazine of horror and suspense, and people forget about the suspense part. So I like playing in those weird places. Sometimes there are, more traditional monsters in my work. Other times it's kind of more like the monster within weird moments, surrealism. People like Brian Evanson or Olivia Llewellyn or AC Wise. There's a bunch of people out there who are doing this kind of hybrid work. I like to sit in those weird places, I guess. Whether Mulholland Drive being more neo-noir, whereas like a lot of the work coming out with like A24 is kind of sliding into more of the speculative, whether it's The Witch or Hereditary versus, say, something like Enemy, which I'd say, aside from the spiders, how you interpret the spiders, I guess. So I think it's all really close to each other. And then what I like is being able to surprise people and to create something original that people haven't seen before. And so that's kind of what I like to read, it's what I like to write, what I like to teach. And then just trying to figure out with my students, what kind of stories are they trying to tell? What are their strengths and weaknesses, and how I can help them be the best voice, the best storyteller of whatever they're trying to do. Not make them sound like me, not make them sound like Stephen King or Chuck or anybody else, but have them sound the most like who they want to be. And that's worked well for me in the last 12 years. 3 novels, three short story collections, 150 stories. I edited 4 anthologies. I ran a magazine, ran a press, and I've been nominated for Bram Stoker, Shirley Jackson, and a Thriller Award. So you can see how I kind of cross over. I don't want to say at will, but depending on where the story takes me. That's also kind of the way that I write. That I never know where the story is going to go, and so I try to. I'm more of a pantser, that I write from a place of one emotion and one concept, one idea, and I kind of method write. Put on that skin suit, become that person, and then chase the story down. And quite often I'm surprised. Where do I end up? What happens? What do we see? What's real? What's not real? Had this novelette, Ring of Fire, that had this whole epilogue at the end of it that I wasn't anticipating. And when it happened and the story was handed off, this baton from the protagonist to a secondary character, I didn't see that coming. But in the end, I think it really worked well. So I know I'm kind of throwing a lot at you there, but it's kind of been my crazy journey of how I got to where I am here now.
Yeah, there's a lot of really cool stuff to unpack there, and I'll try to do my best. One thing that strikes me relates to a little bit of what we were mentioning right before the episode started recording is our crossover, because so many of what you're mentioning, so much of what you're mentioning has a lot of parallels with me, oddly, and it just is remarkable how small such a big world like the writing world actually is once you start connecting, because you and I think just figured out that we were both read together one night in St. Louis years ago at Jet Air's Noir at the Bar, which is a really cool reading series.
Right.
And I had worked in advertising straight out of my bachelor's degree long enough to know that I hated it. And when I was a kid, man, the Fight Club changed my world. The movie got me interested in the book, and that book
Yeah.
is what really shaped it for me. And you even got to work with Chuck Palahniuk, didn't you, on Burnt Tongues
Yeah,
anthology?
I was lucky to be able to do that too. It just kind of when I was at the Cult back when they had a workshop there before it moved over to Lit Reactor, I was one of those authors in the workshops who was like writing my stories and submitting them too. And then I ended up becoming a workshop moderator to help with things. And even though I was a moderator, I could like submit my work because everything was read blind. And my work got in front of Chuck a couple times, but he never really he never really liked what I was doing, which is ironic because one of the stories he didn't like ended up getting into Cemetery Dance. So I'm like, well, he's a minimalist, I'm a maximalist. We're just that's okay. But eventually, with that, the way that Burnt Tongues came about was through a competition and through the workshop. And so when Chuck picked the final 20 stories or whatever, people who were involved, him and Dennis Widmeyer, and there's some other people, then they just were having trouble getting it, placed somewhere. And so Dennis asked me if I could step in and help out with that because I'd already edited and published, an anthology. And I said, yeah, I'd love to. And then it got into kind of a bidding war, and then it ended up getting sold to Medallion, who recently went under. And now we're getting it back into print again with Turner Publishing. But I mean, Chuck's amazing. He's one of the most generous people I know, very talented. I love his writing. Probably the first 8 books I love all of his early stuff. Fight Club, Survivor, Choke, Diary, Lullaby. Everything. It's really, got me excited to write again, woke me up a bit. Working with him on that anthology, allowed me to meet up with him and hang out with him and Irving Welsh when they were in town. And just such a great opportunity because very talented people, very generous. I talk to Chuck every now and then now. In fact, with this book getting back in print again, we've been chatting, and he's just such a great guy. And I love how he pushes the story, not just to shock you for shocking's sake, but to really kind of work in these transgressive moments so that he really is able to manipulate you, which is something I try to do with my writing is try and guide you to a series of events and emotions and leave you, feeling a certain way. I know I can't always control that, but I try. And then as long as you're somewhere in the ballpark of what I was shooting for, how you interpret your story might be different than how I intended. But as long as I think we're ending in a similar place, then I feel like I've probably done my job. But yeah, Chuck's great.
Yeah, that and I like how you found your footing with kind of the categories of writer you are. I was going to call you something like, to borrow Lee K. Abbott's phrase, a kitchen sink writer. Like everything, if it can be in there and it fits in the story, it will be in Richard Thomas work. As opposed to like the minimalist, that
Right.
maximalist is a nicer way to say it too. But I mean, it might seem petty for those who are purely readers, to be concerned with categories, but when you're trying to put your stuff out there or trying to get published or trying to set yourself up, everybody wants to know first and foremost, well, what's the category of you? Like, are you a horror writer or not? And that's so tough if you're going to keep creating stuff. And that's kind of related to a phrase you brought up, which I like, that you're so interested in what the supernatural opens up. And that's kind of a version of a question I wanted to hit you with is what does the supernatural open up when you introduce that into a novel, a story, a TV show, a film? What do you think that does open up for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think with everything I write, being a maximalist, that what I want to get is I want to get a visceral reaction from my audience. My wife can't even read my literary fiction because like it makes her cry, and she's like, I don't like, I can feel you manipulating me and working me over, and like I don't want to feel like that. Like you're making me sad. But I think, especially with speculative and supernatural, that I want to be able to do that. So when I look at what it opens up, I think of like in horror, there's this pairing between terror and horror. So to me, it's this 2-part act, right? Of building it up, the tension, the clues you're leaving, the unknown, the hints, the atmosphere, all the stuff that you're building to create this kind of prelude to the madness. And then you eventually get there, whether it's dropping the veil and revealing the creature or the horror or the insanity or the Lovecraftian unfurling of chaos and old gods, or like whatever you're doing, whether it's like tactile and physical or emotional or spiritual or intellectual, whatever you're doing with your work, it's that game we play of these breadcrumbs, these clues leading you to something. So I think what the supernatural can do and what it can open up for you is that experience of witnessing something and being a part of something that we couldn't otherwise interact with in the real world. That, you know, in my life, I shouldn't say that. I have seen some weird things in my time. I'm sure you have too. You know, I've seen some ghosts. I've had some weird things happen. You know, talk to God, leave my body. I've had, you know, different things have happened. We've all seen things in the desert, you know, or the weird. You're like, what was that? You know, ghosts and spirits and things out there. I'm sure there's a lot more stuff out there. You know, aliens that we don't even know. So I just try and tap into that and present a case for what could possibly be. So whether that's like a physical creature, like, you know, your werewolf and your vampire, your zombie, your undead, your demons, or something else that's almost beyond comprehension. I like to play in both of those spaces. That I don't mind having like a more traditional monster per se, but I also really like to sit in places where what you see is something that isn't necessarily based on a classic trope or creature or plot or, you know, mythology or fairy tale or fable. I like to create things that haven't been seen before. Juxtapositions, jamming together weird things, you know, part wolf, part, you know, sin eater, part, you know, demon. I don't know, you play with these things to create something wholly different, you know, and unique, which I think is, we were talking before about Annihilation. And that's why, you know, I look at that book and the Crawler and what he does with that as being very original, that I hadn't seen something like that before. I found that fascinating. When I think about Perdido Street Station, I think about the Ambassador to Hell. I think about the Slake Moth, which I hadn't seen before. I think about the Weaver. And then you can open the gate to, you know, things that are beyond comprehension, which you see a lot in Lovecraftian fiction, where it's, you know, Into the Mouth of Madness, right? And what's the Nick Cage movie, the color of
Color Out of Space.
yeah, color out of space. And so you get these moments and these experiences that are just almost beyond comprehension. I think about the movie like Under the Skin, where the opening to that is almost like 2001: Space Odyssey. It's really almost kind of abstract, and you're getting more of a visceral reaction. Or some of the weirdness in the movie A Ghost Story, where it's, you know, you step outside of a classic ghost and you see this guy in a sheet, you think this is stupid, and then you have the way time moves, and you have the way that loss and grief manifest in that physical space, and it's really very powerful. So I think, you know, for me, I think for a long time I wrote a lot more traditional, a lot more kind of gritty realism. And, you know, I had to write my vampire stories, I had to write my werewolf stories, I had to go through all that stuff, ghosts and demons, and they're all fun. And even with those, I tried to do something different with it. But I think what I'm trying to do more and more these days is tap into things that are either harder to understand or comprehend, or I'm going more internal into us as human beings and what we're capable of. So kind of straddling the fence on both of those.
Yeah, and I like how you're bringing up that clarity of the difference in that approach, you know, between terror and horror. And I think it was Anne Radcliffe who first started saying like the difference between terror and horror is, you know, stumbling through the dark and tripping over something, realizing it's a murdered body, and then stumbling through the dark and feeling something and not knowing what the hell it is. You know?
Right,
Uh,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
Because we want to assign a label to it and go, oh, it's a log. Oh, okay, well, it's a dead deer. Okay, it's a Kupachabra, you know, or it's like, I don't know what that is, or it's a black space and I'm going to fall into it. You know, I mean, I'm going to lose my mind. So I think for me, when I play with my writing, I try to get it to work on 3 different levels. That if I can do the physical plane, that's the stuff that's the easiest, I think the most entertaining, the kind of movie, the chess pieces around the board. That if I can succeed on that level, I think I can appeal to a wide audience. So here's the thing, here's the plot, here's the characters, we're moving around, we're doing the things, here's the bad thing, we're avoiding the bad thing. And then if I can then go to the next level, which is like the emotional, the internal conflicts and the way they're reacting, the motivating, factors, then that's the second level. If I can get you to follow the story, be entertained, and then feel something on top of it, root for somebody, sympathy, empathy, hatred, whatever, that's the second level. And then if I can get to the third level, that's, I think, where the literary fiction and the deeper thinking, it's the philosophy, it's the intellect, it's the psychology of how things work, and the big concepts that you're tossing out there, which may include abstracts too. So that to me could take it to another level where you might have that literary influence. So that ideally I could write something, a story or a book that across all three planes is going to be entertaining. Things are happening. You're going to want to turn the pages. You're also going to feel something so that you're emotionally reacting, and then it's going to leave you with something at the end of the day to think about or contemplate or wonder or question. So to me, I think if you could do all three of those things, it does create more complex work. But again, if I do my job right, you can enjoy it at a base level. You don't have to go deeper. But for the reader who wants more, this is a maximalism at play, I guess. You have the emotion, and then you have the concept. Whether it's talking about the old gods and Lovecraft, or you talk about the 100th monkey and the idea of spontaneous evolution, or you talk about like a crisis engine in Perdido and how you can put things into a state of crisis and harness the energy. So I think you could play around with all that, and that's what I'm seeing out there. People are talking about a lot more literary horror being out there right now, and I'm using the quotation marks right now with my fingers. That it just means it's going a little bit deeper, above and beyond just like standard gore, standard shock tactics, standard slasher splatterpunk stuff, cats jumping in windows. Like that's all fine and dandy, and I'm not gonna poop on anybody's enjoyment of that. But for me, it's when you go beyond that. When I look at the emotion and the family history and Hereditary, and the way that you get me to care about the people and the cinematography and the music, like that's what gets my hair to stand up on end. That's what makes me flush with this fight or flight response. And that's what has the movie staying with me long after I stop watching it.
Yeah, I like that. I like those three levels a lot too. That emotional, or the physical, that emotional, and that philosophical,
Mhm.
and I think it would make sense to call it the maximalist approach, but even more so, I think it's just great storytelling like that. You're right. If you can get the train on the tracks and rolling, the plot, the character, the literal level, then you can take them where you want to. And I think that's something that even kind of minimalist stories, I think of Alex Garland perhaps as
Mhm.
a
Right.
screen minimalist. He'll take a simple gem of a story, and yet it works at every possible level as deep as you want to go into it. And
Right.
man,
Right.
there's, yeah,
I'm sorry.
like
Well, what's funny too is that Chuck actually has a saying, and he's a minimalist, where he says, "Teach me something, make me laugh, and break my heart." So that's actually pretty close to what I'm saying. Although the laughter part, I would probably swap it out with, make me feel something or scare me or whatever, when
yeah.
it comes to darker stuff. So I think you're spot on when you say a minimalist can do that too. You still want to do the same things. You still want to get us to care. I use Freytag in my writing and in my teaching. Are you familiar with Freytag's triangle and Freytag's pyramid at all?
Yeah, and it's from the technique of the drama.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so for me, it's like if you can nail down those key elements in a structural way, that your mechanics, then that's the framework upon which you can hang all this abstract and all your art and the meat and the weirdness, right? That if you can start from a place with a narrative hook, if you have your inciting incident, that moment in time after which things will never be the same. You have your exposition, your world building, and then it's the ramp going up of the increasing tension of your story as it plays out, constantly one-upping, right? Increasing this tension while you're dealing with the internal and external conflicts, which is just saying the external are the things that are outside of you. That's the meteor plummeting towards the earth. That's the pack of zombies down the road. With the internal conflict of your characters, what's motivating? What do they want? What do they care about? That's all going to build up to your climax, your resolution, your change, which is essential, the flip into change, and then the denouement, which is the epiphany and the understanding of what has just happened in the mind of your protagonist. So if you can kind of hit those key points, I see that as kind of being the horizontal path we're taking here, whereas the three levels we talked about being more the vertical stack. I know I'm creating this really complex chart and graph here, but basically, if you can do those things with Freytag, that's a really great way to get people to feel satisfied at the end of a story, and to feel something at the end of the story. That I find with my students quite often when something isn't working, like in my short story mechanics class I teach, which is the basics, which is Freytag and then a little bit more, that something's not right. Either the ending didn't work because you didn't resolve a main problem. The ending didn't work because we don't care, because you didn't go internal and you didn't show us why they're doing these things they're doing. The story didn't work because you started in the wrong place, or you didn't start from that moment of um, urgency and high stakes, so that you started way too early. And so the first like 500 words, the first 10 pages is just build up to where the story really starts. So whenever people screw up, it's usually one of those key essential markers or pillars in your story. And that's why it's not going to be satisfying. But I know it's a lot of, everybody has their own method for storytelling and people use different structures, but that one's always worked for me.
Yeah, and I like how I feel like Freytag opened up the horror as a slightly different kind of story in that chapter when he introduced the pyramid, when he said, you know, you had that play that after the turning point becomes the anti-play, and his example is Hamlet, but then he has the different type of play which starts anti-play. King Lear was his example for that, and after the turning point, you know, it's all essentially tragedy and horror until the turning point, and then you just watch the aftermath of all the other characters dealing with it. And I'm thinking, yeah, there's a type of story in which characters are getting somewhere or exploring something. There's another type of story in which characters are breaking down and trying to survive and don't. and I like how he kind of laid that out for us. Well, you seem to be really good at both types, actually. But I think there's a lot that's with horror that is that kind of anti-play. And
Right.
um, yeah, and you've even written on some of these storytelling techniques, like in Where Nightmares Come From. You did one on the many faces of horror, on how to create these kinds of scenes, and you also teach the importance of not showing the monster and not revealing the monster of the thing. So I'm curious on your thoughts with that, because I know that there's some filmmakers like Guillermo del Toro who just can't help themselves and
Right.
constantly want to show the monster in perfect lighting as well,
Yeah.
too. And so, yeah, I'm curious if you could give us a little insight on how to do this pragmatically, and or maybe what the benefits are of not showing the monster.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good question. I think when I look at techniques and I look at like how slow you reveal things and whether you show the monster or not, like I always try and tell my students, and what I try and do with my work is it depends on the story you're writing. That one story might need one thing, or another story needs something else entirely. Bird Box by Josh Malerman was a big success. Love that book. I read it the day after Thanksgiving a couple years ago in one sitting, and I was like sweating, and it was just intense because it never lets up. And he never shows the creatures, which I think in that case, in that book, is brilliant. I'm so glad he didn't, because he left it up to me. And even when I teach it a couple times a year in my contemporary dark fiction class, I ask people at some point, like, what do you think it looks like? And the creature, and we get the range of responses is all over the place. It's, tiny little things, it's giant epic things, it's big wide wings, it's things with feet and like walking, and like all these different things from clues they've seen in the book, and whatever it kind of triggers in their own fear and their own history. So I think in that case, like, I think it works that you don't show it. I think about Stephen King's book It, that when you finally get to see the thing and it's just like a big spider, you're like, oh, okay. Like, it has to be so much more than that, right? So I think you can really go either way. That you can, in the instances where I don't show it, it's because it benefits the story and the tension and the characters by not showing it. That when I do choose to show it, and I finally do go there, it's because I need to do that as well. That if I don't show it, if I don't give you that information, if I don't take you to that place, then you're going to be unsatisfied. You're not going to be fulfilled. So I think it's all really personal, depend on the kind of story you're writing. It could be all inside your head. It can all be psychological. It can all be emotional, or it can be on a physical plane. So I think if you're gonna show the creature, that all I can say is work really hard to be original with how you do it. Work really hard to show it differently, to tap into mythology and folklore and cultures that are not the obvious ones, not the same old Greco-Roman Western myths. Work hard, like Wendigos were a big thing recently that I hadn't read before. I remember the first time I read like a Baba Yaga story. Tap into whatever it is you have to offer, especially if it's your culture. If you're from Poland, if you're Native American, if you're in Japan, if you're Japanese, whatever your culture, wherever you come from, like use your mythology, use your experience to talk about ghosts and demons in a way that makes sense to what you were taught, and bring whatever kind of originality and innovation you can to the page. I think that's the best chance you have of really wowing the reader, whether it's a book and a movie like The Ritual, or it's like the psychological drama of Hereditary, and then the reveal of what's behind it all at the end. I think it's really how you want to play out The Witch. I mean, think of how they show that in there, what they show, the restraint they use in that film, the moments they choose to go there when they do show it. I think it's really done very well. So, in fact, I wanted to, if you indulge me, if it's okay, can I read something from Annihilation, or is that
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. That'd be cool. Because I mean, and I wanted to get into some of those too, because, you revealed to me that we consider we love some of the same things. Like I consider The Witch and Ex Machina like two of the best films of the past 2 decades,
Totally.
and Annihilation, especially the book, I think was really fascinating to me. So yeah, absolutely, bring in some Annihilation.
Okay, so I just wanted to read like 2 paragraphs. So if you're out there and you have not read Annihilation, you may want to like fast forward here. I'm just going to read a paragraph. I don't want to spoil it, but I'm going to talk about the crawler, because to me this is a moment in the book that really made the whole book for me, and it directly influenced my own writing in my novelette Ring of Fire, where I tried to do a similar thing with the reveal of a creature in that prose. So I just wanted to read when we first see the crawler and what the biologist sees. So listen to all the sensory details here and try and see if you can picture what the hell's going on. I thought this was just really original. So page 176, if you have the book, 176 of the paperback. The sound that came to me now was like a crescendo of ice or ice crystals shattering to form an unearthly noise that I had mistaken earlier for buzzing, which began to take on an intense melody and rhythm that filled my brain. Vaguely from some far-off place, I realized that the words on the wall were being infused with sound as well, but that I had not had the capacity to hear it before. The vibration had a texture and a weight, and with it came a burning smell, as of late fall leaves or like some vast and distant engine close to overheating. The taste on my tongue was like brine set ablaze. No words can, ... No photographs could, ... As I adjusted to the light, the crawler kept changing at a lightning pace, as if to mock my ability to comprehend it. It was a figure within a series of refracted panes of glass. It was a series of layers in the shape of an archway. It was a great slug-like monster ringed by satellites of even odder creatures. It was a glistening star. My eyes kept glancing off of it as if an optic nerve was not enough. So I'll stop there before I end up reading the whole passage. But
That's so good.
Yeah, right? I mean, the sensory detail in there is so cool. It's poetic. His language, his command of language is brilliant. And then the way, the good use of the rule of threes here, right? Showing this a figure within a series of refracted panes of glass. Like, try and picture that. Try and picture the way it's refracting, the way it stacks down inside itself, like the different ways he presents this to us. It's almost too hard to put it together. But as you keep reading, and as that whole scene plays out for, I don't know, 5 or 10 pages, he goes into all these different moments. There's a sensation where it said it felt like a heated metal rod was shoved under her skin, and then the pain distributed like across her entire body. And I thought, wow, like what a way to explain the pain of what's going on here as she's like broken down, fractured, and disintegrates, and then is put back together. Like, that's so intense, and her experience, and then the fear she has of when it turns its eye on her, the gaze, the eye of Sauron here, right? And the way that Jeff creates this creature, and the way he deals with the sensory reactions and the pain and pleasure of what she goes through. The feeling of drowning in that moment, but not drowning. It's just so intense. And I think it's just so original. It really just kind of blows my mind.
Yeah, and it's not like it's hiding the monster. It just won't give you the information about it that's going to make you feel comfortable. Like it won't give you the the category to fit it because you get to see it, but you don't get to get it. And it's kind of like, well, as Stephen King once said, like the problem with showing the monster when it turns out to be a 50-foot tall praying mantis is there's some part of you that always thinks, well, at least it wasn't an 80-foot tall praying mantis, you know. So,
Right,
and
right.
but when you don't get to fully get what it is, however much you're seeing it, man, that really takes it to another level. And it's well, I think maybe it's one of the reasons when I first read that book, I thought, well, this is awesome and unfilmable. And then I heard, oh God, not only are they filming it, but my favorite director of all time, Alex Garland's going to do it, and he's going to force me to not like it. Kind of like I don't know, the Silmarillion or Dune. I read
Right.
them and I thought these are unfilmable. It's not going to stop them from filming. It's never going to satisfy me. But yet Alex Garland ended up doing, something. I think something different from the book. Like what you read is kind of touched on visually and through some cool sounds, but not quite. I still think the prose does it more for me. And there's that moment in Annihilation, well, a couple of moments that didn't quite make it into the film, but were the
Right.
most powerful to me, which that the vines kind of growing their own idea of what language is, and it's just this never-ending babble, and that just got me at some deep part of the horror
Yeah.
side of my mind, and I
Yeah.
can't tell you why exactly. It just felt like I kept wanting it to have a message, and then it got me thinking about what human language even is, and my God, what are we in the universe? It was so cool.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I love that because I think it's plus when it gets so weird, when it gets so uncanny and Lovecraftian, it's like you have to you have to make decisions on things that you've never seen before. So it really forces you to either grab hold or let go. And either way, I think can be really kind of a pretty intense moment. Can I read one other thing to you real quick?
Oh yeah, sure.
So I wanted to read from my novelette Ring of Fire to try and show you. I haven't done this before for anybody online or podcast or anywhere, so I think it's kind of a cool experiment to show that passage that Jeff wrote and that whole scene and how it influenced my writing. So if I can just give you like 2 paragraphs of the middle of my story here to show you how that directly influenced my own writing. Is that cool?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
So all you need to know is that there's a dude in a room and there's some weird stuff happening, and then I'll leave it at that. So here we go. Eventually, it returns. They return, and in the moment, I feel as light as a feather, levitating off of the cold concrete bench or bed or cell, whatever this is, wherever I am. I am nude, and over my skin is a rippling of sensations, what start out as tiny rubber flagellum, weaving and undulating, rustling under my body, raising me up as if on a series of tentacles, my body limp and relaxed, floating in the air. The strands pulsate and move, wrapping around my appendages tighter and tighter, at first comforting, then quickly moving on to panic, a sense of inquiry and constriction as they circle my flesh and start to pull in different directions. Something sharp pierces my skin, and I shriek out into the blackness, and then it happens again and again, a series of needles or teeth rising to the surface of the tightening lengths of cold, rubbery flesh, some quickly stabbing and retreating, others slower, pushing in slowly, sampling, probing, and extricating. The pain, it is exquisite. I am leaking something, the piercing, the stabbing, the tiny needles, tiny teeth, pulling out water, blood, and other fluids, and something is being injected. A pulsing that rushes through my body as if a great amount of liquid is being poured into me. The logistics of and physics of it impossible, and yet it continues to fill me up. The sensation of swelling, of expanding, running over my arms and legs, my torso, my face. When they start to pull again, my limbs stretching, my bones creaking, I open my mouth to protest, to scream perhaps, and a singular fleshy appendage pushes down my throat, blocking any sound. My eyes widen and I cannot breathe. Tears stream down my face. My skin starts to chill, a sheen of ice building over my flesh, cascading towards the edge of a cliff. And there are 3 ways I can die now, all of them rushing to the surface, suffocating, quartering, and hypothermia. I am raised and lowered, thrashed around in the darkness, the pain spiking and then retreating as if caught by a giant squid. My skin turned to ice, up and down I go, cracks running across the surface of my body, higher and lower, my mouth, my throat, my stomach filled with a weight that is sour and sticky, and then it happens. I am shattered on the concrete, a long pulling sensation coming up and out of my body, the flesh that no longer exists, the flashing of lights, my sight both absent and then suddenly rushing to the surface, the smell of smoke, something burning, and then I hit the floor again, solid. I gasped for breath, crying in the darkness, begging for it to stop. I'll start there. I'll stop there.
Man, that's really good. That is really good.
Thanks. So I appreciate you indulging me here. I was just trying to show how something like Annihilation and the Crawler and the weirdness he has across that whole scene and the whole book directly influenced my own writing, and how I then transferred that into a scene where I was trying to do something similar.
Yeah, yeah, and you do that, and you do that so well, just like Jeff Vandermeer does, and several of these other writers. You get to this place, you're also articulating it well too, so demonstrating and explaining. I think that the answer that I've always struggled with when people find out that the guy who made The Monster Professor and writes monster stories doesn't really watch horror movies per se, and I'm not really into slasher flicks and stuff,
Yeah.
and it's not that I'm not, it's like there's something more appealing to me about the deeper mythology of the horror. I'll enjoy a good slasher flick, but in the same way I enjoy like a Chuck Norris flick. Like it seems fun and kind of surface level, but for me it's not exactly what I'm looking for, and what you're getting at, and what you're demonstrating it's something, and I feel like it's something that I'm not sure we would have gotten to it without Lovecraft, but perhaps it's safest to say that Lovecraft is the one who opened that door. I mean, there have been, right? I mean, he's easy enough to trash if you're looking for reasons to be like offended at him or hate him. I mean, that's the easiest thing in the world. But and there have been some writers like Borges who at first thought he was just a poor imitation of Poe, until Borges started looking at him more closely. He's like, oh, wait, he's done something that we now get to do that wouldn't have been had not been for him. And it's that it's that tapping into that deeper level, the unknown. And so you do it really well.
Yeah, I love that, in the unknown for sure. And I mean, I'm not a huge fan of Lovecraft per se, but I am a fan of kind of the worlds he built, and a fan of Lovecraftian fiction. So like without him, there probably wouldn't be people like Brian Evenson or Stephen Graham Jones or Adam Neville or whoever you're into, Lydia Llewellyn, all these different voices that bend reality, and Brian Hodge and AC Wise, all these people that kind of take that and go farther with it. So I think you're right. And that's really what I'm drawn to too, is the uncanny, the weird, the unexplainable, the unknown, the way that it's hard to explain it, the unexplainable, and then try and present something to people and let them deal with what they see. I think that's a fun place to sit, and then I think it either works for people or it doesn't. I think that's why people who like with A24 films either dig what they're putting out or you don't. The abstract moments in Under the Skin. I just saw somebody on Facebook mentioning how it was a really dry, boring movie for them, and I'm like, how can you say that? Like, it's so intense. Like the music and there's another movie, A Ghost Story, which is very kind of abstract and very quiet, very slow, but like once you get to the weirdness in it, it's like really powerful. So I love that. I mean, there's so much experimentation going on. Like you said about slashers and splatterpunk and whatnot. It's like I just saw Green Room, and like I just was really not a big fan of it, because I feel like I've seen that thing done better before. And I guess at this point in my life, having read and seen a lot, I'm always looking for something that can kind of push it a bit. What they did with the movie Spring, and the way that kind of this romantic gothic horror, or what they did with A Dark Song, and that the end of the movie, which was just so weird and had me crying. It was so touching and unexpected. So I think there's so much original work being done out there that like I feel like I can't just write a story that's about a vampire or something. You know, like I think there's so
Yeah.
much more with it, right?
Yeah, and filmmakers like Robert Eggers,
Yeah,
the Witch and the Lighthouse, like there is no point in his films in which I feel safe as a viewer. Like I always feel like I'm at risk because I can't know I don't know what's gonna happen in a different kind of way than just not knowing the plot. Like I don't know where the safety parameters of his storytelling world are gonna be. And in the Witch,
right.
when that kid starts throwing up apples, vomiting apples
Right.
and praying in that amazing scene after he came in contact with the Witch of the Wood,
Yeah.
and I've just like I'm like gripping
Mhm.
the couch and I'm
Yeah.
looking around in the house like I'm not safe in his films. And it's even though even though you could say, well, all he's doing is telling a traditional witch folk tale. I mean, that's his subtitle, right?
Right.
But he's not. He's taking us back into a type of glimpsing at something
Mhm.
deeper to show us a real kind of fear that not only we did have as a culture and and a species, but we still do, and we can be reminded of it by a really good story.
Totally. And I think part of what works in that movie too is the puritanical time, their belief system. You know, when they move, when they're ostracized and they leave and they're at the edge of the woods, just looking out the woods, I'm like, I'm scared of the woods because I
Yeah.
don't know what's there. It's the way that he presents it. I was lucky enough to go to Transylvania to teach a horror workshop a couple years ago, and it's like the farther and farther I got out into the country, into the area of Transylvania, into Romania, to Bran, Romania, you know, where Bram Stoker's castle, where he wrote Dracula. The further and further we got out, the more I felt like things were possible. The more I felt like things were just on the periphery or in the shadows. And I saw tons of weird things while I was there, you know, a presence outside my room every night at the same time. Something going up and down the valley, the dogs barking, and then the only thing worse than the dogs barking is you hear the something moving is when they all go quiet. The peacock screaming like a woman in distress, something on the hill at night with red eyes after my friend and I climbed up the hill and came back down. We didn't know it was up there with us. Taking a picture at the castle, at Bram Stoker's castle, of a rather innocuous, innocent door and this heart-shaped emblem. And then in the span of one picture to the next, a face appeared in the shape. There's all these weird things we saw. And I just felt like in The Witch, there's things out there, and I wonder sometimes if like the bright lights in the city and the technology and the bustling commerce and everything like pushes that stuff away. So I think for me, the further you get away from that into the woods, out into the rural spaces like that, that's when I'm always probably most on edge, and worried about something bad happening.
Yeah, I was gonna circle back around to that because I would be horribly remiss if I let a guest like yourself slip in. Oh, I've seen ghosts and had out of body experiences and have seen these kinds of things and just let that slide. So we got to take a moment and go back to there. So tell me more about the presence you saw or felt, these ghosts, your out of body experiences, or maybe select one or two to tell us because I can't help but be fascinated by
Yeah,
real
yeah.
encounters.
um have you seen anything weird in your time? You must have seen something, right? You've seen some things.
Yeah, I feel like I have, and I feel like I don't know if I trust myself or not. And then I finally got to the point where like I don't really care what really happened or not. I like I like the strange memories because
Yeah.
not only was I afraid of everything as a kid, and I still probably am, but I have a huge imagination and I can't quite tell where where the line is between the two. And then the more I live a weirder and weirder lifestyle,
Mhm.
I stop caring what's real and what's not, and I just like what I like. And so I'll just go ahead and say, yeah, I've seen things, and I wouldn't dare back it up and say that they were actually there because what do I know? you know.
Yeah.
So
Well, I've seen a couple different things, and I think part of what, you know, when I was very young, I saw a guy parachuted on the St. Louis Arch and was dragged down the leg of the arch and died. I was there as a young Boy Scout hiking, and I saw the whole thing happen.
oh my God.
Yeah, it was pretty gruesome. You can look it up in St. Louis history. I'd never seen so much blood. It was as wide as a sheen of blood, as wide as the leg of the arch. So I think at a very young age, having seen some tragic things, it affected me. So I don't know if that made me more open to it or more aware or just more scared of things. But I think that tragedy and going to the extremes kind of I was just open to it, I guess. So that when I was in college, I had a good time in college. I experimented with a lot of different things. I had my moments. We talk about LSD, we talk about peyote and Native Americans and sweat lodges and ways to, conjure and to hallucinate and to deal with spirits. So, I've seen enough things where I've seen time be rewound. I've left my body and come back into my body. I've seen, in moments like that, I've talked to God a couple times. So you can take all that and believe it or not believe it. All I can tell you is what I experienced, and it was profound. So when I see it in a book or a film, these moments, these rituals, these holy moments, these spiritual, mythological moments, like I believe in it because I've seen it. Other stuff outside of that, my friend Martin passed away a couple years ago, and I basically woke up one night to see him standing in shadow at the end of my bed. And it was really unsettling because he and I talked a lot about it. Like if one of us died, like we try and communicate from the other side. I don't know what I expected, but in shadow, it was very dark, the shadow. It wasn't like, Casper the Ghost. It wasn't white. It was darkness. And then when cars were driving by and lights coming in the window, like it would kind of flicker and disappear. But I knew it was him. And he was angry because he'd been 52 years old when he died, and it was premature. He died of a heart attack, but he had diabetes. He had some health issues that he wasn't taking care of. And so all I could tell you is that I saw him and he was very angry, and it was scaring me because I didn't like the anger he was projecting towards me. And I basically said to him, I love you, man, and I'm sorry. And, I want, best of luck to you. I wish you well, but you have to go because you're freaking me out. And then I blinked my eyes and he was gone. So, it wasn't at all what I thought a experience with a quote unquote ghost would be like, but that was definitely unsettling. It stays with me. Much like, so I had a story I was writing called Repent, and I had to there was a satanic ritual in there. And so when I wrote the story, I was doing some research online, and I realized I didn't like reading the things I was reading because I didn't want to complete any sort of recitation. I didn't want to complete a spell, even in my own head, because I felt like the deeper I went down this rabbit hole of research, I was like, this is really kind of freaking me out. To the point that when I wrote the story, any of the rituals I had were incomplete. I didn't put all the ingredients in. I didn't do all the things you were supposed to do. I didn't write down all the words. I didn't even like typing in the words I did, but I didn't put it all in there because I didn't want to conjure something. I didn't want to bring something to me. I didn't want to alert any sort of presence to my existence, because I feel like sometimes when you dabble in the darkness that you can bring unwanted attention to you. And part of the story, Repent, is about a man, a bad guy, a bad cop, whose son is dying, and he goes to do this ritual in order to save his son's life. And so he has to dabble in the dark arts and go to this ritual and be part of the ceremony, and the price he has to pay. For those of you who want to read it, I'm going to spoil the ending here, but I'll try and speak in vague terms. That basically, if he succeeds, he will essentially have never existed. And so the way the story starts is in an alley in the beginning and an alley in the ending, and there's something coming down the alley and it turns the corner. And so then he completes, and by doing that, he kind of, but really, so I was doing all the research for him, so it was weird to put on his skin suit and be him, because I felt like I was him for a little bit, and I didn't like it. So flash forward to, 3 years later, about a year ago, when my son was doing a photography assignment for high school. And he'd drawn a pentagram and lit some candles and had taken these pictures. And he came to me after he was done and said, "Hey, what do you think about these pictures?" He's like, "What should I do with this pentagram?" I'm like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, you should draw something like this, or you shouldn't play around with these things you don't understand. And so at that point, I tried to look some things up, and I'm like, well, okay, let's tear it apart. Let's flush part down the toilet. Let's like drown part of it. Let's burn part of it. Let's like separate it. So it's not like, I tried to do whatever I could to kind of undo whatever he might have done.
Huh.
The next night, that night, I woke up in the middle of the night swinging at the presence of some big dark shadow standing over my bed. So
No
all I
kidding.
can say is that I hate night terrors. I hate waking up in a dream, but I was waking up to the presence of this shadowy thing standing over me, swinging my fists at it. So
Yeah.
take all that as you will, believe what you want to believe. I mean, all I can say is that I've seen things, and I think the power of the human brain, that we only use a small fraction of it. So I think there's probably a lot of things out there we just don't see, or not aware of, or we can't comprehend. I believe in spirits. I believe in a higher power. I don't know much more than that. I believe in reincarnation. So I have my own belief systems. I don't know. You can agree or disagree, but all I can tell you is I've seen enough things to make me feel like there's a whole lot out there that we just don't understand.
Yeah, and some of what you're saying reminds me of I had John Michael Greer on the podcast. He's an actual occult magician, druid, and writer on the occult, and he was saying, yeah, sure, it's dangerous to dabble in magic, just like it's dangerous to dabble in brain surgery. If you don't know what you're doing,
Right.
man, you're in trouble. And I suppose in that way, all negative accusations about me and what I do and what I'm interested in, and even the podcast are probably all valid. And that skeptics are a little bit miffed at me for taking the supernatural and the occult too seriously, and then the people who take it seriously are miffed at me for not taking it seriously enough
Right.
to be responsible with it. And so
Totally.
but I have to tell you, man, your story about Martin was giving me the goosebumps.
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's
I mean, and especially because it was like so unexpected. I mean, it's one thing if you want to, go in the desert and do peyote or something, but it's another thing when it just kind of manifests of its own free will. The thing with my son too, and that pentagram really freaked me out. So that I'm like, you can't. Next time you're gonna do a photo shoot with anything occultish, like you gotta talk to me first, and you're not like opening some portal or something, okay? Please, because I feel like because I was the one that destroyed it, like that's the reason it came to me. So I don't know what it was. I'm hoping it was nothing, but like I don't want to draw any of that stuff to me. I don't want to be the flame that draws the moth of negative energy to me, because I mean, if we can, outside of religion, if you can believe in good, then you can believe in evil, right? So if you believe in a god, do you believe in the opposite of whatever that might be? So whatever your belief system, I just feel like there are powers and presences and entities and um, consequences and things out there that you should just be careful with. That's all.
Yeah, and I think a lot of I like this because I think a lot of the episodes here end up toward the end being, if nothing else, a little bit of a little bit of instruction on self-defense against monsters, and so I think you've offered some really good advice.
Yeah,
Uh,
man, go plant some lavender. It's okay. Put some different, plants outside. Put a salt ring around your house. Do what you gotta do. I mean, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
you've been I've had you on here for a bit longer than I promised. So you've been really
That's all right.
generous with your time, and I really appreciate it. So maybe we should leave listeners with a little bit of information on where they can find out more about you and your classes and your works and your projects.
Sure.
The links to which will be in the description below on whichever platform you're listening to it. But
Cool.
yeah, where can people find more about Richard Thomas?
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, it's been a great conversation. So I apologize. I tend to babble and go long. So hopefully you got all your questions in. Um, yeah. So my blog is whatdoesnotkillme.com. What does not kill you makes you stronger. Nietzsche. And then I have my teaching website, which is storyvilleonline.com. I teach at Lit Reactor, a short story mechanics class. That's litreactor.com. I have an Amazon profile. I'm on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and everything. The classes I teach a short story mechanics at your own pace, which is kind of a downloadable thing you could do at your own pace. But most of the short story mechanics I do is at Lit Reactor as kind of the basics class, talking about Freytag and how you can learn to make sure you have the essential elements. And then the more advanced stuff I teach online, when I teach people from all over the world. So, I mean, my classes, we do them via Skype and Facebook, secret Facebook groups and email, and we workshop. So the contemporary dark fiction class is kind of that next step up, 16 weeks. We have like an essay every week, a column every week. You write an exercise every week. And then you're workshopping a story once a month, so 4 stories per class, and then you read 4 books. So it's a really great class to kind of go 16 steps deeper into what Freytag does. So it's going much deeper into genre and technique and different variables. So you can write a more deeper, layered, intense experience. And then I have an advanced creative writing workshop, which is mostly reading the best horror of the year, the best fantasy and science fiction, the best American literary, and then workshopping, so that you're learning to apply critical analysis skills to your work and the best of the year to understand what works and what doesn't, and trying to understand why these stories got into the top-notch magazines where you want to be and how they got into the best of the year on top of that. So when I look at kind of and then I do a novel in a year, a novel workshop class, which is a daily prompt, and you write for a whole year. January is all prompts about pre-writing. December is all prompts about submitting and getting your work out to an agent or a press. We write for 6 months, turning in about 11,000 words a month, and then you edit for 4 months. But I've seen my students have really had the most growth when they've gone from the short story mechanics to the contemporary dark fiction to the advanced creative writing workshop. Those people who have completed those 3 classes have done really well. I think the reason they've done really well is that I think when it comes to writing, there are kind of 3 different steps, 3 different things you have to be able to do in order to succeed. So the first is the mechanics is, can you write a story that has all the key components, and can you be creative? Can you create? So that's the first step. Can you create? Can you write a story that works? The second step is going deeper. How can you be original? How can you be deeper? Understanding what you have to do to compete against the best writers out there, and how much more you need to do than just a basic story. So the second step is really looking at your work and trying to figure out what's working and what's not working. And then the third step is being able to identify what's not working and have the skills and tools to fix it. So I think if you can do those 3 different things, and those are all different classes, and this all takes time. I look back to probably the first 3 years of my writing career was doing basically all of this. I'm trying to share with my students what I learned from like the 5 or 6 classes I took, with Stephen Graham Jones and Jack Ketchum and Monica Drake and Max Berry and Chuck Palahniuk and all these people. And then everything I learned in my MFA program, and try and give it to you at a fraction of the cost and a fraction of the time, so that if you can create and then look at your work and apply critical analysis to it to diagnose what's wrong, and then figure out what's wrong and be able to fix it, then I think you can go pretty far with it. I do think some people are born with gifts and are just better writers than others. I'm sure you probably know people who've always been big readers and always been big writers. But I also think that you can be a good writer or a decent writer. And if you bust your ass and work hard and study and read, that you can evolve into a really great writer. I think just as good as someone who's born with those gifts. So I think you can be taught to write better. Some people just have a more natural inclination to storytelling. So it's just more innate. It's easier for them to conjure it up and to tell it, and to see it, to visualize it. Whereas others have to just work a little bit harder. So that's basically me and my classes in a nutshell. So yeah, come find me and drop me a note, and if, however I can help you in your writing career, I'd love to help you get there.
That's really cool. Yeah, I'm absolutely with you on that teaching philosophy that sure talent matters quite a bit, but if that's all it were, if that often quoted Flannery O'Connor phrase, like, yeah, yes, writing can be taught, but only to writers. Like, if that were true, I think then there wouldn't need to be as much training, or we wouldn't see so much improvement with people taking it so seriously. But like you, I've seen many people with lots of natural talent really go nowhere simply because they weren't really interested in exploring what was possible and how they could take it up a notch. So
Right.
yeah,
And
it is teachable. Yeah.
Yeah, and what I tell people is, be your own writer. So if your background is advertising, if your background is psychology, if your background is poetry, if your background is journalism, if you lived in Chicago or New York or Conway, Arkansas, or France or Germany or Tokyo, whatever your sexual identity and orientation, whatever your culture, whatever your mythology, whatever you had to bring to the table, bring it. And then that's why when you ask 10 people to write a story based upon 3 prompts, and the prompt is red and oak tree and cardamom or something, you're going to get 10 wildly different stories, because we're all writing from a different place. Even if I said write a vampire story and here's like 5 things you have to do, would still be radically different, because we each have to tell the stories that we're equipped to tell, and some of that being equipped to tell comes from who we are, and other aspects of it come from what we've learned and what we've seen. You can go out there in the world and experience it, whether it's travel and food and sex and drugs and rock and roll and seeing the world, or you can explore through film and music and art and television and reading. However you get there is how you get there, but whatever you have to offer up in your stories comes from the body of knowledge that is within you and the emotions in the stories that you want to tell.
Yeah, well said, man. I like that. And this has been a really fun conversation. I feel like
I don't know if
I
they're going to
learned.
talk about monsters enough.
I think so. Yeah, we got to talk about fictional monsters. We got to talk about real encounters. We got to talk about how to create them.
Oh, okay. I want to make sure I didn't leave it short, but do you have like a favorite, like weird, obscure monster that you like to talk about, like on your podcast, or is there something
Man,
else?
you're well, first of all, you're opening a couple of doors here, one of which is dangerous that I will go on way too long about because I get caught up and I can't stop myself when I get talking about my own favorite monsters, and then I realized I forgot to ask you, who is your favorite monster of all time, or alternate question if you choose, what monster scared you most as a child? Um, and so maybe I'll make my answer really brief, and then you can like
Okay,
leave
sure, go
us
for it.
with one of your favorite monsters or a monster that scared you
Sure.
most as a child. Yeah, I go nuts about monsters, and I think the monsters that get me the most tend to be those out of older mythologies. Anybody who's listened to probably more than one or two of these podcast episodes already knows that Fenrir is a bit of an obsession for me out of Norse mythology, and he's
Yeah.
on the cover of the podcast, right?
Right,
And
right.
so
Yeah, I've been looking at it for the past hour. I know. I love it. Freaking out.
and I can't help it, and every time somebody asks me that, I have to almost physically restrain myself from reenacting the whole Fenrir story just to explain what. But yeah, I find myself, I mean, but I'm also I can be quite easily convinced to care about whatever monster a given storyteller tells me. Like I don't really consider myself that big into science fiction, but an Ex Machina or an Alien, like while I'm watching those films, those are the most fascinating monsters in my world. So I'm perfectly happy to indulge anybody in their monsters, and I guess because I have an obsession with them. But maybe we can find out from you who your favorite pick is, and or what monster scared you most as a child.
Yeah, I think it's kind of related. That I think for me, it's what drew me to neo noir was a lot of the unreliable narrators and some of the surrealism, the things that you're uncertain about, the lies and the truth behind it, and going down that kind of rabbit hole. So I think for me, the creatures that scare me the most are the ones that are hardest for me to comprehend. So I kind of a broader statement is kind of, I would say, maybe like the shapeshifters. The I think about Slenderman. I think about anything that's kind of that something that's not what it seems.
Yeah.
So imposters. The things that scare me are things like on the periphery of my vision, shadows, things that are not always solid. So I think that can pull in spirits too. I have a thing about mirrors. I don't like mirrors. So I
I'm
think
with
for
you. I'm with you on mirrors and like the doppelganger thing too. When I was talking with my publisher in the final stages of my collection of short stories, he's like, "You have a thing with doppelgangers. You got a lot of doppelganger stories back to back." And I'm like, "No, I don't. I don't have any stories about doppelgangers." And then he starts pointing it out. I'm like, "Oh my God, I have like 6 doppelganger stories. I had no idea."
I know, that's great. I love it. Yeah, I mean, because I think it's that kind of going back to the heart of, like it's already in the house. Like the call came from inside the house. It's already here. It's too close to me. So I think
Yeah.
that's the thing. My story, White Picket Fences, has this weird unfurling at the end where the woman opens a robe and she's something else entirely. And in that moment, he's contemplating as this horror unfolds what could have been, and the girl he fell in love with in this 1950s setting, and how things might have played out differently as things go horribly wrong. So I think it's that it's not one specific creature per se. It's the things that are slippery, that are amorphous, that are shape shifting, that are not solid, that are not reliable, that are I would be much less afraid of like a giant squid or wolf or whatever barreling towards me because it's logical, and I can try and decide what to do, and I can live or I can die. It's the things that I find harder to evade, that you've somehow conjured, or their gaze is upon you now, or the spirit, you've summoned them, you prayed to them, whatever. Those kinds of things really scare me because it feels like kind of the unstoppable monster. I think that's what worked a lot with Lovecraft, were the old gods, the ancient gods, the chaos, and the thing that's not going to be stopped. And it's so vast and so old and so powerful that you're just a speck of sand on this chaotic, hellish landscape, and you have no chance to stop what's coming. So I think it's maybe it's me just being a man, that men like to fix things, or maybe a father, like to protect my kids. I think I just, things that are unstoppable and unknowable and unreliable, like those are the things that bother me the most. I think it might go back to something as simple as like Invasion of the Body Snatchers as a kid, and that scene at the end where he turns to you and points and goes, and you thought we got away with it, and you thought it was safe, and you thought he was part of the, no, he's been taken. So you're like that. I work towards that in my writing, and I talk to my students about it, that ripple effect, that pond in a stone. Stone in a pond. That would be an interesting story, a whole other story. But the way it ripples out, the way it continues, the way it cascades and pushes out, that bothers me because it feels like it's larger than what's contained on the page, that it could be beyond just some words and a singular creature into something much larger that you can't stop.
Yeah, yeah, that's really cool. I like that, man. Well, you've been so generous with your time. I've now kept you way past what I said I would. But I've really enjoyed this conversation. You took us to some
Me
really
too.
cool places. I think listeners are gonna love it a lot too. So thanks again. It's been a pleasure talking with you, Richard Thomas.
All right, thanks. I appreciate it.